Welcome to Wonderspace. It's great to have you on board. My name is Steve Cole, and over the past 64 episodes, I have been asking the same 6 questions to amazing people from around the world. The questions orbit around wonder and stories of hopefulness, and the setting for each journey is this shared window on the space station, from where we see everything from a different perspective. Before we introduce our guest this week, our friends at asknature.org are going to help us to re-wonder.
Sunflowers and many other plants famously follow the sun, turning and bending throughout the day to face the light. But it's not the light drawing them closer, it's the shade pushing them away. Inside the plant cells, light on the sunny side repels hormones called auxins, concentrating them on the dark side. While there, the hormones weaken the rigid walls of the plant cells, allowing more water to flow into them, causing the shaded cells to expand. That one-sided expansion tilts the plant towards the light. As the sun moves, so do the hormones and their impressive but temporary effects.
Our orbit this week will take us up the east coast of America. And to experience these views with us in this ultimate window seat, we welcome Madison Adams and Gary Sheng. Madison is the Director of Product, and Gary is the co-founder and COO of Civics Unplugged, a social enterprise that empowers leaders of Gen Z with the training, funding, and network they need to become civic innovators. Gary and Madison were nominated by James Arbib from RethinkX, who was our 32nd guest on Wonderspace.
So I nominated the team at Civics Unplugged because they're smart, curious, motivated, and driven by a genuine sense of purpose to create a better world. But they're also young enough to imagine a totally different system without the dogma and preconceptions that afflicts other earlier generations.
The full-length interview can be heard on the Wonderspace podcast, which can be found on our website and on most podcast platforms. For this video orbit, Madison and Gary answer 3 of our 6 questions and start by giving us a glimpse into their life stories so far, with an emphasis on what they are doing currently.
I believe that there is a war on the human spirit. And it's not coming from just one source. It's not coming from one political party. It's not coming from a kind of just from one foreign country. I believe that there's something like a devil of discoordination, a devil that of just chaos and confusion, and that I'm personifying like entropy in certain ways. I'm personifying this like meaning crisis that we're feeling. But that motivates me so much to help people find their purpose as it relates to regenerating the world, because there's a lot of regenerating that needs to be done. And when people find a purpose, their whole well-being improves. Right? So you could work out a lot, you could eat the right food, but if you don't have a purpose, you don't have hope in the future, you're gonna look like crap, you're gonna feel like crap, and no one is better off for that. You are not an upward spiral, a source of upward spiral that you can be for people if you feel that purpose and you're like radiating that optimism through the world. And so where I'm at right now is like, I feel like we're in a make or break decade in America, in the world, in humanity, and optimism is the new punk. When surveyed world leaders, only 3% of people, of those leaders said that they were optimistic. And so it's like the most vogue thing to be optimistic for some reason today. But like and I like to say that right now it is naive to be optimistic, but it's also going to be self-fulfilling. Because once enough people are optimistic, and are building their communities, building public goods, building the future of humanity, regenerating the world, repairing ecosystems, that optimism is going to be increasingly warranted. So that optimism, I'm not saying I started the optimism, but we are quite early on in that journey of inspiring the world to believe that they can make a difference in the world, and that they can flourish.
Yeah, and I guess I'll touch a little bit about the work that we're doing at Civics Unplugged. So Gary co-founded Civics Unplugged, which is the organization where we train people to be the civic innovators that our world needs. And I was a part of the first fellowship class, which is a 10-week program that gathers young people from 50 states and 50 countries to learn about case studies in civic innovation and give them the tools and the funding they need to create projects that, again, impact the world. And so the program is completely digital. It was digital first before the pandemic. And so we're leveraging technology to empower young people to strengthen their communities and strengthen our democracy and in turn the world. And we do that through the core fellowship, but we also are always experimenting with ways to better serve young people and the planet. We've created what's called the Dream DAO, which is essentially a training program for young people to use Web3 technologies, blockchain, cryptocurrency to make an impact in the world. We're launching a climate fellowship that teaches young people how to find what we call their U-shaped hole in the climate and energy space, so they can have a meaningful career. And so, yeah, I think we're in the business of training young civic innovators.
The Civics Unplugged co-founders, I'm one of them, came with slightly different angles. We came with different life stories. One of us was, for example, not me, but a lot of respect for he taught civics and history for 10 years and was a vice principal. So he understood, he cares deeply about the power of education, but also understood that the way the system has been structured does not facilitate the sort of empowering education that our future leaders need. Another one came from the perspective of a civil servant and also someone that actually ran for mayor of New York City with the purpose of actually reforming education to be more empowering. I came from the lens of, I worked at Google for 4 years, and I just felt like an opportunity that I could use my superpowers to empower young people to change the world, right? And weave technology in an interesting way. So, for example, people thought we were crazy for having a digital-first leadership program and community when we launched in January 2020. What happened 2 months later? The pandemic. And then people said that we were geniuses, and I was like, no, we just see where things are going, and we also want kids to talk to each other. We want people in Oklahoma to talk to New York, to talk to people in Idaho, and then like our second program, we had international kids knocking on our door. And so we had this girl from Hong Kong, we had this girl from Singapore, we had this girl from Italy, and they all wanted to be part of this program. And so what we've realized is just through lots of, we had an initial impression of what we were going to accomplish, but what actually happened has really just shaped what we realized we need to double down on, which is we need to create this global community of young, optimistic civic innovators that are going to support each other over the course of many, many years. We're going to support them with funding, internships, and all that, right? But they're going to support each other, and that's the most important thing. And we have kids in Russia, we have kids in Ukraine, we have kids in India and Italy, right, and Singapore and Korea. We had our first applicant from Japan last week, and so we're bringing together all these people that are going to be thinking from a whole human flourishing perspective from this very early age. And then where are they going to be in 10 years? Where are they going to be in 20 years? They're going to be heads of states. They're going to be shaping global culture, global policy, global tech. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah, and I just want to hop in real quick and talk about the term civic innovation, because I realize we're using it a lot and we hadn't talked about exactly what it means. And so I think that when Civics Unplugged was created, we knew we were training a different kind of young leader, and we didn't really have the terminology to say that, right? Like, we're training the next heads of state, yes, but we don't want them to be using the same processes and seeing the world in the same way that the current heads of state do. And so we came up with the term civic innovation that kind of combines these two seemingly contradictory things.
I think hands down it's Gitcoin, not Bitcoin, GIT coin, which is a Web3 institution that has led the charge in normalizing and celebrating the process of creating and funding public goods in the most people-powered way possible. So they started off by funding open source software, but they funded like tens of millions of dollars for open source software. And for everyone listening that isn't familiar with open source software, it is kind of a classic case of tragedy of the commons. Everyone uses open source software. Everyone wants it. Everyone benefits from it. Even just looking at one piece of software called Babel. I won't get into the details of it, but like it's used by every phone basically, and no one knows the name of the people that create it, and no one's like donating to that, right? And so they sought out to solve it, and they're actually on the way to solving it, and they're so on the way to solving it that they're like, hey, let's actually fund other public goods. Let's fund projects that are related to journalism and advocacy and regenerating the environment. And so Gitcoin is not a silver bullet to regenerating the world, but it has inspired me and inspired Madison, inspired a lot of people to really, really think deeply about their role in advancing the common good. And they've made it really cool and fun, and they've opened it up to basically anyone around the world that wants to join this community that's building this movement about public goods. Anyone's welcome, and I think that's just so beautiful.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think Gitcoin is a part of this, but I would just speak to the emerging regenerative movement in Web3 that wants to use Web3 technologies to make the world a better place. An interesting case study is what's happening with the Ukraine crisis. So individuals in Web3 have created multiple DAOs and other methods of getting funding to Ukraine. And the Web3 community has donated as much money to Ukraine as the UN, both at about 20 million. And so it's incredible to see in just a short amount of time what a group of individuals can do when they're rallied together around the power of a technology to do good in the world and see how it's donated. I would have the question of how can we regenerate the world to help align it with that perspective if we were looking from a God's eye view. And so I think that's aligned with a lot of the work that we're doing at Civics Unplugged. The way that Gary is thinking about, his life and what he does next is how can we regenerate the world and make the tools that we have adequately serve humanity? That
is the question. How do we work together to regenerate the world? And I think as Madison and I have been thinking about this question, we realized a sub-question, which is how do we help people see that broader perspective? How do we allow people to be transported to space, at least metaphorically, so that they can see that there's so much at stake? And that we, when we're entrenched in this sort of mimetic warfare of like this culture war at national level and the global level, information warfare, it seems like impossible that we can work together and solve problems. An initial idea, just initial approach that I think we've seen at Civics Unplugged that works really well, that we encourage every leader to think deeply about, is one-on-one conversations, or small group conversations with people about what's at stake. And we may have different biases towards how we might approach solving problems, but we need to figure it out, and we should value our differences. Our differences are our gifts. In some ways, they are our superpowers.
To find out more about the work of Civics Unplugged, go to civicsunplugged.org. In their story of hopefulness, Madison and Gary spoke about Gitcoin, and you can find out more at gitcoin.co. To engage with the previous 64 Wonderspace episodes, go to our website, ourwonder.space. I want to thank Madison and Gary for joining us on Wonderspace, and I hope you can join us next week for more wonders and stories of hopefulness.